Alright, for this video I want to go over a sample form 941X, which is an amended federal payroll tax return. So we've got the 941X here. It's a couple of pages, so we'll go through all the parts that have to be completed. We've also got the original 941, so this was the 941 filed for the first quarter of 2024. This is the return that we need to be correcting. So we've got both of those returns. We also have an Excel workbook here which shows the payroll tax calculation for the company. So we've got the original calculation here, and then we have a corrected schedule on the second tab, which will show the changes that have to be made and then the amount of tax that's going to be refunded. And then lastly, just one slide here covering some background information on the fact pattern. So the 941X is filed for either underreported amounts, over, or both, right? So depending on your situation, you might have to make corrections that send the taxes in both directions, right? So in this fact pattern, though, we've got an S corporation. So John Taxpayer is the sole shareholder and employee in an S corp. John's on the company payroll because he has to have reasonable compensation paid to him. And so his annual salary is set at $13,643.76. And so the reason he did that is because his net paycheck, after we look at all the taxes, is $1,000 a month. So he's just taking $1,000 out a month. That is his net pay, but we've had the annual salary of $13,600. Now, in March 2024, John withdrew his paycheck of $1,000. But he also took out another $1,000 as a shareholder distribution, right? So he's an S Corp shareholder, so he's allowed to take distributions. Now, the problem here is the bookkeeper, when they were looking at the 941 and the workbook, they saw that there was that extra $1,000, and so they categorized it as another paycheck. So instead of taking 3 paychecks for the quarter, so each month, just one paycheck, they added a second paycheck in there, and that's what created this overstated amount of wages, payroll taxes, and federal withholding. So if we have a look at the original workbook here, so the monthly wage reconciliation here and the yearly amount, so we can see here that his monthly wages is the $1,136.98. We have the Social Security, the Medicare tax, and federal withholding is $50 on that amount. So the total taxes, after he subtracts out the taxes, his net paycheck is at $1,000. So he did that for January, right? We have a net pay of $1,000. February was a net pay of $1,000. But in March, because he took $2,000 checks, the bookkeeper said, "Oh, we should just double up on the reporting for the month of March," and that was not correct. So the payroll tax return filed for Q1 use these totals and these values, which overstates the amount of wages and payroll taxes and withholding that should have been claimed for that period. So if we have a look at the 941, the original, we'll just quickly look at this. So we've got the company name and EIN. It is for the first quarter of 2024. And we can see here we've got one employee. There are the total amount of wages for the period, and this is going to be the amount that we're fixing. Federal income tax withheld at $200, right? So everything is done there and filed. So now we need to correct the 941 to report the correct amount of wages, the correct amount of federal income tax withheld, and then the correct amount of wages for Social Security and Medicare purposes to get these taxes changed as well. So if we have a look at the 941X, we'll start with entering the originally filed amounts. So we've got the business name and EIN address, and then we've indicated here that we're filing an amendment for the 941, not a 941SS, and it is for the first quarter, so Jan, Feb, and March of 2024. So you have to enter the calendar year as well. Now down here, enter the date that you discovered the errors, right? So as soon as you discover the errors, you should be filing it as soon as possible. And then in part 1 and 2, we complete the appropriate certifications depending on the changes that we're making. So in this case, part 1, we are filing a claim to have the over-reported tax amounts just refunded to us. And then in part 2, we have the certifications that we will be filing W-2s. Fortunately, we've caught this early enough where we don't have to file corrected W-2s, right? Because this error is being discovered and corrected within the current year. But we do make that certification that we're going to file the original W-2s. And then we can skip over line 4 because we did not check the box on line 1. So we're not doing an adjusted employment return. We're doing a claim. So we're going on to line 5, and we have certified that the amount of taxes that were withheld from the checks are going to be remedied, right? We're going to reimburse the employee for those overcollected amounts. So now moving on to part 3, this is where we start to enter more of the financial details. So it's separated into 4 columns. We have column 1 is the corrected amount. Column 2 is the original amount as reported. Then we have column 3, which is the difference, so the change. And then column 4 are the tax impact to those changes. So if we start with column 2, the amount says originally reported. So we want to pull through the amounts that are the wages, the federal income tax, the wages that are subject to Social Security, and then the wages down here, line 12, for the Medicare. So those can be pulled simply by looking back at the 941 that was originally filed. Right, we have our federal wages, our withholding, Social Security, and Medicare. And so we pull those values over here into column 2. Now we have to look at column 1, the corrected amounts. So if we look at our Excel workbook again, so these are the amounts that were originally filed. Month of March basically doubled up on everything. So we have double the amount of compensation reported, double the amount of federal income taxes withheld, Social Security, Medicare, and so on. And it was also a double up on the employer match, right? So the employer match on those components was also double. So now, if we look at this workbook, we've got the totals for Q1 as they should be reported. So here's our January, February, and March figures with the employee and employer amount of payroll taxes. We've got the column here for the amount that was originally reported, right? So that's from the 941 that was originally filed. And then the change is the difference between the two values. So we're reducing our compensation that was reported by 1136.98. And then all of the payroll taxes that were charged on those amounts are also being reversed out. And so effectively, the net amount of tax that we overpaid, so the amount of tax that the company submitted in excess of what it should have, was $223.96. So we're looking at the employee and employer shares of the Social Security and Medicare, and then the extra $50 of federal withholding tax, federal income tax withholding that was assessed on those wages. So when we have the totals for Q1 as they should have been reported, we can take these wage numbers, the federal withholding numbers, over to the tax return. So the corrected amounts, $3410.94, the correct amount of federal income tax withholding, and then the same $3410.94 reported for Social Security and Medicare. So when we subtract the two, we have a difference, a negative amount. So we have $3410 minus the $4547. So we get a reduction in wages of $1136.98. And then we do the same math for the rest of the line items there. So the taxable Social Security wages dropped, taxable Medicare wages dropped, and then multiply by the tax rate for Social Security and the tax rate for Medicare. So the 1136 times 12.4%, and then the 1136 times 2.9% gives us the amount of Social Security tax and the Medicare tax that needs to be refunded. And then on line 7, we have that $50 of federal income tax withholding as well. So once all these numbers are corrected, now you notice here that there's a lot of blank line items, right? So none of these applied to our company. And so if you have blank line items that don't apply, you can just leave them blank. You don't have to put zeros in there just as placeholders. So we've got the 50, the 140, and the 3297. Add all those up. And so on line 23 here, when we combine all these values, we have a tax correction of $223.96. And that does reconcile with our workbook here, $223.96 that's being refunded. Okay, so we've got our 223.96. We don't have any other line items that apply here. So the total reported on line 27 is negative 223.96. And the language included here, right, highlights if line 27 is less than 0, which it is, and if you checked line 1, this is the amount you want applied as a credit to your 941. If you check line 2, this is the amount that's going to be refunded or abated. And so in our 941 here, we have selected option 2 as a claim. And so we're going to be just getting a refund of that $223.96. Now you do want to scan through the rest of these and make sure they're all completed where required. In our case here, we don't have any of these items, right? So none of these corrections apply to us. Getting down to the last page, part 4, we've got neither 41 or 42 apply. Right, because we don't have underreported and overreported amounts. We're not reclassifying workers. So we just enter a very simple explanation as to what happened here, right? We're amending this because we need to reclassify distributions. And then part 5, input the information on the person that's authorized to sign this. Go ahead and sign, date, and then send it into the IRS. Now, a couple of things to remember here. On each page, you need to be entering the company name, EIN, and then the correct quarter and calendar year. So quarter 1, calendar year 2024. So all of those are entered onto each of these pages. That's really important not to miss that. And let's see. So, and then the last thing to highlight, I think is really important, is to really pay attention to the form instructions on which process you're allowed to use. There are rules about whether you can use adjusted employment tax returns or claims depending on what type of errors occurred, how quickly are you fixing the error. Statute of limitations come into play here. So very, very important to pay attention to those rules. And there are more details in the Form 941X instructions. All right, so that covers it for this tutorial. I hope that was helpful. Any questions, feel free to leave a comment below. And as always, I appreciate you watching and look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thank you.